Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to the EduSat Network. Our topic of discussion today is friends part of our ongoing series on Sardar Patel, and we have already had say 2 to 3 lectures on the same, which you could go back and watch on YouTube. And friends, today is another remarkable lecture on Sardar Patel titled Patel on Zamindars and Zamindari Abolition. And to take this topic, we have with us in our studio same subject expert who has been responsible for this particular series. I would like to welcome to our studio Dr. Neerja Singh, Associate Professor, Department of History, Satyavati College, Evening, University of Delhi. And friends, with this introduction, I welcome ma'am to the studio. Ma'am, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Roshi. It's always a pleasure to speak on this program. Friends, we have already discussed the role of Sardar Patel and his contribution to Indian national movement and his position on various social issues. Today we are going to talk on Zamindars, his relationship with Zamindars and his position on Zamindari abolition. This has been a very controversial issue, and Patel has been receiving a lot of criticism and attacks on his position. We have to look from two perspectives while speaking on this issue, that during the 1920s, two trends were visible in Indian national movement. One was the already existing, the dominant trend of liberal democratic ideology and the Gandhian ideology. Liberal democratic ideology with which the Congress came into being and which was promoted, followed by from moderates to Firoz Shah Mehta, the extremist phase, and the Gandhian phase. This was the broader ideological framework within which the Indian national movement was operating. The other trend was of the left trend, which we see emerging during late 1920s and being consolidated by 1934. And also the consolidation of this left ideology within the Congress took a concrete shape with the emergence of Congress Socialist Party. The leaders of whom were Acharya Naren Dev, Jai Prakash Narayan, Meenu Masani, Achyut Patwardhan, Ashok Mehta and others. Now, they were critically evaluating the program followed by the Congress till now, and they wanted a more radical program on which Congress should initiate movements. It was not that the Congress programs earlier were not radical and revolutionary in nature. During the Karachi Congress, the resolution adopted under the presidency of Sardar Patel, then Faizpur resolution, they all were pro-peasant and pro-poor and more radical in nature. But yet the socialist faction within the Indian National Congress, which emerged in 1934 as Congress Socialist Party, they were for a more movement which should be based more on anti-zamindar, anti-landlords, anti-princes, anti-feudalism. Feudal forces. But the ideology, the values enshrined in the and adopted by the Indian National Congress at the time of the moderate phase, which were like supporting democracy, civil liberty, economic decentralization, secularism, Swadeshi, self-reliance, ethnic coexistence, communal harmony. These ideologies, these values Patel accepted as it was accepted by the moderates and other leaders prior to him. Also, he supported social issues like women empowerment, rights and education for women, temple entry, interdining, interreligious marriages, communal harmony, and he envisaged a socialist, democratic, secular vision he had for independent India. So all these values which the leaders prior who came before Sardar Patel who followed these values, same Sardar Patel also adopted, but unfortunately this left faction within the Indian National Congress, the socialist and the others with left leaning, branded Patel and his colleagues as the rightist, as conservative, as traditionalist, as old guards, because on two issues. According to them, these senior Gandhian leaders were following a class collaborationist perspective approach to towards various classes, and they were for the harmonious relationship within the Congress, which was not being very helpful to the peasantry. They wanted a relationship or a movement launched by Congress, a social movement which could have a more impact on the social structure of or on the society or on the various social classes, that is a Zamindar versus peasant movement or a capital versus labor movement, against which these senior Congress leaders like Patel were not in favor of, because according to them they were fighting the Britishers, a foreign power. Their movement was anti-colonial movement. The colonial state was projecting, the struggle was to make the nature of the colonial state understandable to the masses. Masses who were social masses who were supporting the Indian national movement comprised of variations. It was not one uniform class, but there was variations and diversity of not only of class, of caste, but of culture, of language, and combining them and motivating them to participate in the Indian national movement against a state which was projecting itself that it was modernizing, a colonial state which was projecting itself that it was modernizing India. It was ruling, it was acting, or it was behaving in the interest of India. It was introducing modern institutions, digits of development. It was modernizing India, and therefore Indians were unable to understand, comprehend the contributions, the initiatives which this foreign rule was introducing, and therefore it was failure on the parts of the Indians to understand and to understand their motive and their policies, and therefore they were revolting against them. To make the apolitical masses, which was so diversified, to understand the true nature of this rule was something which was very, very Herculean task for the leadership of Indian national movement. And with this problem, with this Herculean task which they were confronting, if a social revolution is initiated, then the crisis, the chaos it will create, and what will happen to the anti-colonial movement. To this they were very conscious of it, and they wanted to avoid such crisis and chaos which could push back the anti-colonial movement further by say 100 years or 150 years, which with so many sacrifices and with such difficult in such a difficult and diverse situation, they had taken the initiative and the movement was launched. Therefore, not to give a setback to this movement, they were supporting a class collaboration, a united opposition to colonial rule, and for this the need of the hour was to secure garnered support from every quarter. And later on, once the independence was achieved, later on then they settled the question of the social issues, the other problems which could be internally resolved once the foreign and colonial rule was thrown away. And this was the view of not only of Patel but of his other colleagues and leaders with the all India reputation like Raja Rajgopalachari, Rajendra Prasad and others. But this approach was coming under attack by this new emergent socialist group within the Congress, and therefore they were criticizing the Patel's approach and his stand on this issue, that he was supporting, by taking this position, he was supporting the zamindars, he was supporting landlords, he was supporting talukdars, jagirdars, and also capitalists and the princes. Whereas the reality was that Patel, he himself said that I come from a peasant class. I myself am a peasant and I know the problems and the difficulties and where the shoe pinches and the problems of the peasantry, and therefore how can I be a supporter of zamindar or talukdars. But the situation is so that we have to take the support of the from every quarter, from wherever we could get support, because this we are fighting, Congress is fighting on two fronts, one on the political and the other social. The social is we have to do away with our internal weaknesses, that's untouchability, improve the condition of the women, discard this caste differences, these on these two fronts, but it has to be unitedly, it has to be confronted, this problem. And therefore the need of the hour is first to fight the colonial rule, to unite our people, to do away with our internal weaknesses, our superstitions, our backwardness, our illiteracy. These are more serious enemies which are obstacles in the success of our Indian national movement, and therefore these have to be confronted, and then we can later on take up the other issues. Therefore, Sardar Patel very categorically stated that he said that he rejected the allegations of the leftist, of the socialist, that he is friendly to the zamindars, princes and the capitalists. He said the situation is such that instead of, if we launch a social movement which may further divide our society, which is already divided on the lines of caste, religion and ethnicity, this will give a handy tool in the hands of the Britishers, who are already saying that Indians cannot rule, are incapable of self-rule, they are incapable of ruling themselves, they are incapable of modernizing, educating, enlightening themselves, and because of these diversities, because of these internal strifes, and therefore if we follow this, then further problem will arise. Therefore, in his speech at Indore, he said, some people say that I am in the hands of capitalists. I am not in the hands of anyone, nor can anyone dare keep me in his hands. If I feel that I can do without them, I shall even go further than the communist or socialist. I am certainly a friend of rulers and capitalists, as I am of Harijan and the poorest of the poor. If I do not entertain friendly feelings towards all of them, I would be unworthy of the responsibility which I carry. There are good or bad men amongst them, that is capitalists also. How many of us are prepared to sacrifice for the country? If we ourselves are not prepared to do so, how can people blame them if they are not prepared to give up their profits? If we have capital, we ourselves would not mind being the capitalists. It is only because we do not have it that we make all this bother. I therefore ask you not to build your leadership on abuses or enmities, but on love and fellowship. Those who still think that they can revive the old order of things are also doomed to disappointment. I have behaved with the rulers on the principle of mutual affection, and I also wish Jagirdars similarly. I would not like to spread any poison. I wish to solve this problem amicably. But if any of them feel that they can destroy democracy by intrigues and by incitement to subversive activities, they shall learn a lesson of their lives to deal with the problem. this quote and this speech of Patel itself is self-illuminating, because he very categorically he states that he is not in support of feudalism, he is not in support of the operation, the exploitation with the feudal forces are carrying on with the support of the colonial power. He is also against that the peasantry is being exploited and these feudal forces are to be blamed for it, but he was very clear that this is not the appropriate time to initiate social movement, social revolution. He said that Gandhiji's ideology, Gandhiji's program and approach was in itself included the redressal of all the problems, and it could meet the challenge of the backwardness or the defects or the shortcomings of the society, but only when we have first thrown out, when we have first achieved independence. Secondly, he said that he, like being a true disciple of Gandhiji, he was supporter of relationship between zamindars and the kisans, between capital and labor, to be based on compassion, cooperation, trusteeship and arbitration. And he said that any relationship based on violence will not generate goodwill, will not generate happiness and goodness. Therefore, it has to be resolved through non-violent means, it has to be based on values and principles, and therefore, no injustice to any particular class, no injustice to any particular class with the feeling of enmity, with feeling of confrontation, with feeling of that it has to be done away with feeling of annihilation will lead to crisis. And he quotes, he says, he gives as the example what happened in Germany during the period, during the time of Hitler, what kind of chaos, insecurity and stress the society felt, how a certain community was targeted. Therefore, he said that any solution will be based on non-violence, and redressal of the problems of the peasantry has to be addressed, but this is not the appropriate time. And therefore, he said that our aim should be to see that no injustice is done, and either to the big landholders or to the saukars, at the same time to see that no one's fundamental rights are ignored. He said that we may give this much assurance to everybody that however great our difficulties and whatever the injustices perpetuated on us, we do not wish to be unjust to anybody or to act in a spirit of vengeance. At the same time, we must state firmly that we do not wish to surrender our rights. If anyone still thinks in terms of living like a parasite, we would say to him that we do not propose to tolerate it. Anyone who allows another to live on him is not a man but an animal, and we ought to be free from that condition. And this advice he gave to the peasantry. He said that the peasantry has to organize themselves. They have to fight for their rights, and unless we educate them, unless we empower them, this will not be successful. It cannot be imposed from above. Unless the peasantry themselves are ready to initiate and participate in social revolution, it will not be a success story. And moreover, the priority, the Indian national movement is dependent on, the backbone of the Indian national movement is peasantry, the rural poor. The whole orientation of India Congress ideology is pro-poor, or it's pro-poor development orientation. And therefore, the emphasis is on Swadeshi and economic decentralization. So, it is not that the Congress is not unaware of the problems of the peasantry, but there are more pressing issues which have to be addressed first, and also peasantry has to be empowered first before such a revolution is launched or such a movement is launched. Therefore, Sardar Patel made it clear to the socialists that if you are prepared, if you have a sound program, and if you are clear that you can carry on the program, he wrote to Jayaprakash Narayan in 1936 that if you are prepared to launch a movement under your leadership, and if you think it is fruitful, it will give result, he is ready to join them. But if he only makes suggestions and is not taking the initiative and leadership, then he has to abide by the Congress program and the strategy which Congress has adopted and which Congress is following, because as it is clear that the situation, the condition is not very conducive to launch a social movement, but first to fight the anti-colonial movement, make it successful, achieve independence, and then think about such issues. However, he made clear in his speeches to the peasantry time and again from 1930s onwards, he emphatically emphasized, he went on speaking and to the peasantry and talking about that they have to be empowered themselves, they have to unite themselves, they have to be aware and come in the forefront and take up the issues, take up the problems which they are facing. He said that our welfare, he advised the peasantry that our welfare does not lie in the hands of the king or in the merchants, our welfare lies in our own hands. If you can grow your own food requirements from your soil, and if you can also produce your other requirements, no one could be happier than yourself. He said that how can you are always crying, complaining, you are begging, but you are the food giver, you are the savior of the society on whom the society depends, you are the backbone of the society, you are the brave people, you are not weak, you are not you are capable of launching movement, you are capable of fighting your own wars, and therefore you have to morally and develop self-reliance, self-respect and discipline amongst yourselves, and this will be by adopting by giving up caste differences, by giving up certain habits, by giving up the untouchability, by reforming themselves, by educating yourselves, you will strengthen yourself, you will make yourself brave, you will empower yourself, and then when the time comes, you will launch a successful movement. This was his answer to the socialists. However, the socialists were not satisfied with they wanted immediate action to be taken against the zamindars, and therefore this remained an issue of differences, an issue of contention between the socialists and the senior leaders of the Indian National Congress. And therefore, when the during the ministry period, most vehement criticism of Patel and his colleagues emerged, because the left faction within the Congress was putting pressure that more radical and more revolutionary reform which is visible immediately should be adopted, without realizing that this ministry was a sham ministry. It was not Congress ministry, it depended for its existence on the colonial power. It was the British who, by whatever generosity they could show, were showing, and it was result of the generosity or placating the demands of the Indian national movement, of the leaders of the Indian national movement, or showing to the world that they were a liberal state, they were not imperialist, they were not the exploiters, they were there in the interest of Indians. To keep up with this pretension, they offered this India 1935 Act, under which the Congress ministry came into existence, but which was again was a stunted, a sham ministry, and to expect more radical reforms from them, and to expect that they will be free to implement whatever they thought they could do, it was not true. It was not true, and it was not possible. And within the given limited space, the Congress ministry did gave certain relief to the various classes, gave certain relief to the peasantry also. But since it was not the ministry, it was not ministry which came into existence during the it was not a ministry which came into existence when India was free. India was not yet free, it was still a colony of the British, and therefore it had to function within certain limitations. Its rights, its functions were circumscribed by the not being independent, and therefore such high expectations could not be realized, even if socialists were in the shoes of the Congress leaders, if the socialists were there instead of the Congress, if it was a socialist ministry instead of Congress ministry, they would also have not been able to do much. They could also they could not have been able to achieve much as like the Congress leaders during 1936 to 38-39. And therefore, to put this allegation, to criticize, to condemn that they were being collaborationists, they were being pro-landlords and pro-zamindars and pro-princes, was not a very being fair to the Congress leadership. And from these speeches, from the programs, it was under the leadership of Sardar Patel that Karachi resolution was passed, which had made very radical suggestions. He continued the same tenor, he continued, there was no shift in his position on Zamindari abolition, on the role of Zamindar, on the nature of Zamindari system, on the nature of feudalism, on the nature of the the princely states and the role of princes. There was no shift, and because of this position which Patel emphatically, categorically emphasized, that they were obviously they were the parasite lot who were residing on the surpluses of the peasantry. He was very clear about it. But to launch a movement, on that also he was very clear about it, that appropriate time is needed, and therefore, but he kept on prodding and kept on motivating the peasantry that they should organize, they should feel that they are not weak, they should have faith in themselves, they should have self-respect for themselves, they should give up their the systems, the traditions which divides them, that they should throw up, that they should initially fight, they should fight initially against caste divisiveness, the untouchability. They should promote interdining, interreligious harmony, interreligious relationships, interdining, and therefore he said in 1935, in fact he scolded the peasantry and said that he had not come there to teach the Kisans to weep over their lot or to teach them hatred against anyone. The Kisan was the supporter of the whole country, as he produced food material, and Patel was pained to see Kisans weeping over their plight. He admonished them that they should learn to realize their own weaknesses and remove them. Until that was done, there was no hope of their upliftment. He also made it clear that the situation, it is very easy to criticize, it is very easy to condemn, but it is very difficult to take initiatives to launch movement, to contain it, to continue to maintain it, and therefore he told the peasantry that it is very easy to condemn, very easy to criticize, but he is clear, and it is also, it should be clear to the peasantry and to others who criticize the Congress ideology and the position and the strategy of the Congress in the launching of national movement or anti-colonial movement, that neither communist nor socialist nor any other body of reformers would reform Kisans until Kisans themselves realized their shortcomings and made efforts to remove them. One great weakness of the Kisan was that they feared everyone. They should learn to be fearless and form a strong Sangathan. He said that I am familiar with the various problems and the pains that the farmers suffer. I have no soft corners for the Zamindars. If the Kisans can rid themselves of the burden of Zamindar and they can improve their lot, I would be the happiest of man. And this was the true position, and this position he maintained, and he time and again Patel kept on saying that he was not for Zamindari system, he was not for the a capitalistic system, but he was for a system which was based on democratic principles, which was based on secularism, which was based on the principles of social justice and equality, where each community, ethnic group, social, religious group have freedom to choose and act in a free environment and have a tolerance and communal harmony and ethnic coexistence. And on these principles he was visualizing a independent India should be of this nature. And therefore he was clear that Zamindari system has to go, but it should not be on the feeling of enmity or vengeance. It has to be on non-violent principles and in an amicable method. It has to be dealt with. It should not be dealt in a way that it creates further crisis, further chaos in a country which has been bled white by the colonialist, which has been drained of its surpluses, which is whose economy is not only economy, political institutions, social structures have been badly shattered by the colonial power, and therefore in such a situation which is not only culturally been impoverished, educationally been impoverished, economically, politically and socially being impoverished, has to be dealt with delicately. It should be handled delicately, and therefore appropriate time should be taken, but Zamindari system has to be abolished. He said, he made it clear that those who do not cultivate the land themselves must seek another occupation. So he was very clear that those who are parasitic, living on the surpluses of the other caste and other class, have to go away. The land is the mother of the cultivator. It is their right to enjoy the fruits of their land, and revenue power of the talukdars should go to the people. He said, and therefore he was not in favor of class conflict. He said class conflict will defeat our purpose, which is our first priority, to launch a successful anti-colonial and nationalist movement, to throw away, cast away foreign rule, to achieve independence and rebuild our societies on according to our needs and our perceptions and our vision. And therefore he emphasized that class collaboration was the need of the hour to defeat the forces of imperialism, and therefore the Patel and his colleagues, whom the socialist faction within the Congress had branded as right or traditionalist or conservative, were very aware, were categorically made it clear that collaboration is the need of the hour. Patel said in 1935 that abolition of Zamindari system was something to be done in future, and if we insist on it today, our cause would suffer. He also added, if you plan for the abolition of zamindari, you have other problems coming up before you, and obviously the issue of foreign domination, the colonial rule. Therefore, it is not a question merely of abolition of zamindari, but its abolition in a manner as will create no trouble for us. Otherwise, all the plans will go to a dung heap. The abolition of the vested interest is a good thing, but indecent haste will nullify everything and delay the thing we want, because he was clear and he also made it clear, but it was the politics of the others who realizing but still insisted on such demands. Patel made it clear that chaos is what the Britishers want. They want the Indians to fight amongst themselves. They wanted Indians to fight on the issue on the lines of caste, on issue of ethnicity, on issues of culture, language, so that there is chaos, so that they can show to the world that they are unable, incapable of governing themselves, living peacefully with each other, or with the feeling of tolerance, with the feeling of harmonious living. They wanted to show to the world that it is us, that it is we the Britishers who have been able to maintain sanity here, maintain law and order, maintain stability, peace here, and Indians themselves are incapable of ruling themselves. And this projection Patel, as Gandhiji, as other leaders of the Indian National Congress did not wanted to show to the world, that they wanted to show India being a old civilizational society with deep knowledge system, which largely was based on tradition of orature, and therefore which was rejected by the Western concept of knowledge system, which basically relied on the literature, written document, knowledge which could be documented, and therefore they projected their knowledge as the only knowledge, and they rejected, condemned the Indian tradition of knowledge system, which was largely based on the orature. Therefore, this suggestion that the Indians are divisive, the Indians fight amongst themselves, they cannot live in harmony, this projection they did not want to, they wanted to negate it. They wanted, through the action of united anti-colonial movement, by launching united anti-colonial movement, they wanted to give this the projection that Indians are capable of living together harmoniously, as they have been living together since time immemorial, since centuries they have been living together. And this new states, this new foreign power with new features, new character, has been the major culprit of projecting India in a negative color, giving it a negative color, and highlighting its weaknesses, which were not so much there, which in every country, every nation has some problems, has some weaknesses, has some anxieties and stress, which India as also had like any other nation or any other society. And but this projection they did not want to be this tool, they did not want to, this opportunity to attack India, they did not want to give into the hands of the colonial powers. And therefore Patel emphatically stated that yes, this is the problem, but which has to be dealt with once we achieve independence and when we have the appropriate time. And therefore during 1934 to 1939, Patel spoke on how government was responsible for the plight of Kisans. Here he was emphasizing that largely the problem was created by the colonial powers. They did not understand the agrarian system, the economic system, the land revenue system, the ownership of property, who controlled land, how much revenue was demanded, what kind of customary and traditional relationship between each caste was, what was their occupations. So, all these things, the social and economic functioning of the caste and of the relationships, the productive activities, the production process both in the agricultural sector and the cottage industry sector, what was not examined or researched or learned by the colonial power. And they were the people who introduced private property as it was in the West. So, the Western concept of private property they introduced into India. They made the zamindars the proprietor owners, the owners of the land. They denied the customary rights, the traditional rights of the peasantry. So, most of the problems which the peasantry was facing was the creation of the colonialist powers, and therefore he emphasized that first we have to do away with this. Once we do away with, once we are independent, we can set the system right, we can see the problems, we can examine independently without the interference of the foreign power. And so he emphasized that it is the administrative policy of the government which is responsible for the plight of the kisans. It is only a partial view which makes people believe that it is the zamindari system which is responsible for the plight of the farmers. If one ponders a little, one will come to believe that this is only half truth. Even so, my views on the questions are different from those of others. I am of the firm belief that the main reason why the farmers find them in such straitened circumstances is the administrative policies of government. Patel blamed the government for the status and power of the zamindars enjoyed. He said that this is the lot who depends on the patronage of the colonial power. They have no commitment towards their peasantry, and they have no commitment towards the urban poor. They are the lot who by pampering, by being servile to the colonial powers, are making the best of the situation and indulging in exploitative activities and exploiting the peasantry, and they are to be blamed. But this problem can be addressed only when there is no foreign intervention, when we are free to assess our situation, our problem, and act accordingly. He mentioned that Sir Harry Haig had advised the zamindars that they were the natural representatives of the farmers and should try to regain that position. Therefore, according to Patel, this advice was not given with good intentions. This advice was given to garner support from a social class whose interest will be tied up with the interest of the colonialist powers. And this class, this Indian class will always fight for the continuation of British rule, and therefore they purposely created this faction, this group, this social group, the so-called zamindars, the feudal forces, the princes who were in support of the British rule, who were for the continuation of the British rule, because their interest was tied up with the interest of the colonialist. And this Patel highlighted through his speeches. This Patel time and again wanted the peasants to realize, not only the peasant but the other social weaker sections who were being exploited, who were the major sufferers of the colonial rule, should realize and organize and empower themselves and participate unitedly, first in the Indian national movement, and secondly in the second phase of the movement, that is the upliftment of the society, the pro-poor development of acceptance of pro-poor policies, acceptance of social harmony and ethnic coexistence. And therefore, he said the British colonial government and zamindars together had broken the back of farmers, and when the administration was not sympathetic to the farmers, the zamindars found it easy to persecute the kisans. To avoid class conflict, throughout in his Allahabad speech, Patel reiterated that a part of the foreign conspiracy was to sow the seeds of discord among the various communities. He said, "You would love to hear me talk about the evil ways of the zamindars, but it does give me pleasure in telling the farmers to rise and fight against the government and the zamindars. I was telling the people that the problem was as to how to snatch power from the rulers and also from the zamindars. From the times immemorial, those kings who did not know how to rule were deposed by the people. I told the same theory. Congress has decided that it wants to keep friendly relations with the rulers, with the zamindars, but if there is misrule in the states, Congress cannot be a silent witness to it, because British Indian people and native states people are one and indivisible. Let no one run away with the idea that the working committee or any member of the working committee is anxious to placate the princes and zamindars. Therefore, what actuates us is not any overflowing love for the princes or anything in the nature of extra unjustified regard for their interest, but it is in the interest of the people of the states and the desire to make their conditions somewhat better than they are, which actuates the working committee in the policy which it follows and which it now places before you for your acceptance. I ask you to have that attitude in mind in regard to this question. It is undoubtedly true that if we can have a perfectly democratic constitution in the states, conditions will be infinitely superior to what they are at present. There can be no question about what, as the statement itself says, we have the same desire to achieve that objective as anybody else, either in this house or outside this house, but we have to recognize facts. We have to recognize our limitations. If recognizing these, we have to act cautiously, or as some might call moderately. All that I can plead is that you should give us credit for the best intentions in favor of the states. Thus, Patel was never a supporter of feudalism. He stood staunchly against the zamindari system, but he was very clear when it should be implemented. Selection of appropriate time is very important. And secondly, one must, while concluding, one factor I want to highlight is that it was this socialist faction within the Congress which emerged within the Congress, and its emergence with this was not being opposed by these leaders whom these socialists condemned as the rightist or the conservative. It emerged, it's from the fact that its name was Congress Socialist Party, shows that the Congress, how democratic the Congress organization was. Secondly, as I mentioned in the beginning, that Patel adopted the values enshrined in the Congress ideology, which was articulated by the earlier leaders like Gokhale, leaders like Surendranath Banerjee, Dadabhai Naoroji. The Gandhian phase, these leaders, Gandhi or Nehru or Patel, they accepted the initial programs which was formulated, articulated by these early leaders, and these leaders were regarded as moderates, whereas Patel and his other colleagues like Patel, Prasad or Rajaji were condemned as rightist or traditionalist or conservative or old guards. So, it is very dichotomous, I mean it is very thing to be thought about, to be seriously thought about, that certain historiographic perception leads to such confusions, whereas it was in the values which Patel stood for was not different from the values which Gokhale or Nanaji, Dadabhai Naoroji and Surendranath Banerjee stood for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the clear presentation, and of course very interesting and a lot of insights we have gained from the lecture. So, on the basis of that, ma'am, I was keen on asking you a few questions that would also perhaps clarify a certain point for a student, or would also spur them to pose some questions to us on YouTube. So, ma'am, please correct me if I am wrong, but Patel insisted on the policy of no injustice that happens to either the zamindars or the peasants. So he was not anti in either way.
He was for a solution which should be non-violently should be dealt with. See, the crisis was that the success of Indian national movement could be achieved. I mean, the success of the Indian national movement could be reached only with the united participation of all the social groups within the society. First agenda was in front of them, the Herculean task or the major task to be confronted was to do away with the colonial rule and generate consciousness and feeling of nationalism of a kind which could tackle the challenges the colonial rule posed within a society which was apolitical. So, to generate that level of awareness, consciousness that they should participate and the true nature of the colonial rule. What is the nature of colonial rule, which was projecting itself as the modernizing force, as a force which had come with the values of social justice, which had come with the principles of democracy, liberalism, and therefore they were projecting this whole movement was unfair. It was hampering the development agenda of the Britishers. And so to organize a fight against them was a major task. And if they simultaneously started social revolution, started a movement of peasant against zamindars, labor against capitalists, so it could have created a sheer chaos and it could have created a situation which Britishers wanted. And therefore, it was not that he was against abolition of zamindari. He was not against zamindari abolition, but selection of appropriate time.
Right, exactly. So, but could we again then, ma'am, say that in his fight against colonial rule, he wanted to also, these issues just came along, or was he primarily interested in these issues and that helped him to also reinforce the battle of
No, he was primarily interested in these issues. The fact that title Sardar he got was by participating in and organizing very successful peasant movement, the Bardauli movement, which was the seen as the classical example of a successful peasant movement organized on Gandhian principles. Also, I want to add here that in other parts of the world where feudalism was dealt away with, the manner in which the feudalism was dealt away with. Take for example in France, in French Revolution, the whole aristocracy, almost 80% of the aristocracy was annihilated, guillotine. What happened in Russia? What happened even in England? They hanged their monarch. So it was not that the changes did not happen there, changes happened, but through violent means. It was not a through non-violent means that changes happened, that feudalism gave way to new society based on the principles of liberalism, social justice and democracy. Here in India, it so happened that we do not acknowledge the value of the Gandhian movement, the movement launched by Gandhian and his leaders like Patel and others. That so apparently it seems to be smooth transition, but the angst, the anxiety, the emotional upheavals, even these zamindars and these feudals who were till now have been surviving parasitically on the surpluses by exploiting peasantry. This smooth transition, this introduction of new India, the India based on the fundamental principles of equality, social justice and democracy could happen because of the way they had conducted the Indian national movement. The principle that the strategy, basic strategy being non-violent, not being having any feeling of enmity or vengeance or vendetta towards
Right.
any particular social group or community led to this social transition, which we do not value it, but its significance should not be lost, keeping in mind what happened in other parts of the world, how they dealt with their feudal elements and dealt with the feudalism.
Right, absolutely, ma'am. And so a very neutral approach and a very positive one at that, which we can also say that he was not trying to target in specific any group in a negative fashion. And with the respect to this, ma'am, I also wanted to ask you, was there any attempt to say snatch power from the rulers and zamindars, and because of unequal distribution of power and the power being in the hands of the princes and the zamindars? So
no, I mean, what do you mean by snatch? I mean, it was part of the Indian national movement. State people movement, Praja Mandal movements happened in these princely states. Right. The approach of the Congress leaders was that unless there is internal demand for such a movement, the local people, if they organize and launch a movement, leadership should come from the local areas. Only then Congress will support, because imposing from above will not be successful. True. Will not be a success story. Initiative should come. Unless the people are ready, you cannot launch a movement. This was the Gandhi's approach, this was the approach of Patel and other leaders, that demand, this need to realization of injustice should come from within. Unless you realize that injustice is being done to you, you cannot participate in a movement, you cannot organize a movement. So no, I mean, any attempt to snatch away, but yes, organize a movement on the principles of democracy, on principles of freedom, on principles of equality was initiated, was supported, and later on they also joined these Praja Mandals, the movement.
Right. So ma'am, as you said, we can assume that Patel was largely supported in his endeavors when he was carrying out these issues. Yes,
very true. Definitely he was, I mean, he was a very important leader of the Indian national movement and major initiator the Indian national movement, and he played a very significant and very important role. And the thing was that therefore it is more imperative that more research should be done on the contributions and the approaches and their perspective.
Right, ma'am, absolutely. And friends, so this was our lecture on Patel, his ideas on Zamindari and Zamindari Abolition. And of course, before we wind up, sincerely thanking ma'am for being here and talking to us and giving such a wonderful lecture. And friends, just to give you a heads up, we have more lectures lined up on Patel as part of this month, so please stay tuned for that. So again, thank you ma'am for being here today, and thank you viewers for watching us. Have a wonderful evening ahead.
Thank you.